The creation of the International Space Station served as a symbol of the establishment of relations between the Soviet Union and the United States of America following the end of the Cold War. This unique scientific research center, located in Earth's orbit, has become a facility for solving tasks in the most extensive areas, from medicine to the technology of producing new substances and materials. Moreover, astronauts from different countries, regardless of the relations between their states on Earth, coexist on board. People are delivered to the ISS via the Soyuz space shuttle. One day, biologist Kira and engineer Christian are sent to the station, where 4 cosmonauts are already present. As Soyuz enters orbit, the Flight Control Center congratulates the pair, who are eagerly awaiting docking, joking about the Russian tradition of knocking on the door 3 times before opening it. Finally, the newcomers are greeted by their new teammates, American Gordon and Russian cosmonauts Nika, and brothers Nikolai and Alexei. Kira is amazed by the weightlessness and has to adjust to this new way of existence. Despite the language barrier and cultural differences, Americans and Russians get along well. Nika teaches Kira new Russian words commonly exchanged on the station. Then the woman is settled into her section. Gordon shows ways to get comfortable for the night. Personally, he sleeps in a bag, but some prefer a free flight. The woman immediately gets to work, placing the mice she brought with her into cages. Alexei helps her and explains that they also had many mice, but they cannot live in space as there's nothing for them to hold on to. In the evening, the astronauts have a festive dinner where each shares stories about their place of birth and they sing popular songs together. The only rule on the station is not to talk about politics. The newcomers distribute gifts from loved ones and souvenirs brought from Earth. Then Kira looks at Earth from the space station for the first time, and her colleagues explain the main effect of the view. From here, borders are invisible, and all of humanity is united and indivisible. Later, Nika helps Kira get ready for the night, as the first night is the hardest. But in the morning, the woman wakes up in excellent spirits, which is spoiled when she sees the mice in poor condition. Distraught, Kira looks at Earth and suddenly notices numerous flashes in the United States. She calls the others, and people realize that a nuclear war has started on the planet. Gordon orders everyone to immediately leave the dome and closes the shutters. Communication on board the station is interrupted, but everything works in normal mode. Then Gordon receives a written message from Houston stating that an act of aggression has occurred between Russia and America, and he must take control of the station by any means necessary. Later, he discusses this message with Kira and Christian, who suspect that the Russians received a similar order from their government. Nevertheless, people decide to wait at least a day before taking any action. But then, Nika reports a problem with the thrust. It turns out that the station is in too low an orbit and could fall to the Earth's surface unless the center makes system adjustments. The first tension among the astronauts begins to arise, as each thinks of their family left below. Nikolai informs the crew that the radio may not work because the antenna outside the station is broken, and it can only be fixed manually. Gordon goes out into space. Nika helps him put on his spacesuit and kisses the man goodbye, making it clear that their relationship is more than just professional. Once in open space, Gordon sees Earth engulfed in flames and asks Kira not to let anyone near the windows. Then he begins his work. To distract her colleague from negative thoughts, Kira asks Gordon about his relationship with Nika. He admits that he met her here, in space, and changes the topic to Kira's personal life. She shares that she spent 7 years studying organ replacement but faced failure, though everything might work out in zero gravity. Meanwhile, Alexei listens to their conversation and then cuts the wire. While Christian tries to find the reason for the loss of communication, the Russian cosmonaut replaces the damaged wire with another piece that looks intact, so the American finds nothing wrong. Gordon, meanwhile, approaches the antenna, for which he has to unhook the overly short safety tether. He realizes that the antenna is fine, then a mechanical arm starts moving, threatening the astronaut's safety. It turns out to be Nikolai's doing, without the knowledge of Alexei and Nika. Gordon tries to call out to Kira, but the mechanical arm knocks him off the station's surface and throws him into open space. Nika and Kira try to see the astronaut through the windows, then put on spacesuits and rush to the airlock, but upon extending the rescue rope, they find no astronaut at its end. Kira wants to go out and look for Gordon, but Christian asks her not to leave him alone with the Russians. They, in turn, confess to Nika that on the day communication was lost, they also received orders to eliminate the Americans by any means necessary. Alexei apologizes, not thinking his brother would do such a thing to Gordon, but the latter reminds him that he has no doubt the Americans would have done the same to them. Nika pleads with Alexei to save Gordon and threatens to tell everything to the Americans. She cries out of powerlessness, while Kira and Christian conclude that the Russians attacked first and Gordon is no more. Furious at her comrade's treachery, Nika goes to Kira and asks for her help. She is willing to give Kira her key in exchange for the key to the American locker. While she distracts her colleagues, Kira must sneak into the laboratory, open Locker 0, take out samples of radiation sickness medicine developed by Alexei in orbit, get into the Soyuz, and return to Earth. Because only by having the medicines can the survivors of the nuclear war be saved. Initially hesitant, Kira is persuaded by the argument that only the state with the medicines can dictate terms to the defeated and agrees, exchanging her key for Nika's. Nika sneaks to the location of the oxygen tubes junction, where she is caught by Nikolai and Alexei. They realize that the woman is ready to blow up the entire station just to avenge her lover's death. Nikolai tries to persuade her to abandon the idea, while Kira rushes to the laboratory. She can't find the Zero locker when Christian admits that there isn't one. Kira realizes that Nika deceived them, and they go to confront the Russians about their plans. Meanwhile, Alexei tries to persuade Nika not to blow up the station, but she behaves aggressively. Christian, sneaking up behind her, hits her on the head with a cylinder, but, miscalculating his strength, kills her. As the Russians come to terms with this, Christian and Kira decide to hide, hoping for communication to be restored. The man is devastated, as he only wanted to neutralize Nika, not kill her, and cries from the guilt. The brothers discuss the situation, and Nikolai asks Alexei to help him kill the Americans. He reminds him of their duty to their country and people, but Alexei refuses to participate in murder. He mourns for Nika while Nikolai, taking a screwdriver, goes in search of the pair. Later, Alexei, looking out of the porthole, suddenly sees Gordon, clinging to the side of the ISS. The Russian cosmonaut uses the mechanical arm to help Gordon return to the station, while Nikolai unsuccessfully searches for Kira. He tries to deceive the Americans, saying that Nika is alive. They need to gather together and think about what to do next, but instead of Kira and Christian, Gordon appears, armed with a drill. His friends, shocked by his resurrection, appear. The American demands to know what happened to Nika, and Alexei has to inform him of her death. Enraged, Gordon locks all his colleagues in the compartment and attacks Nikolai with the drill. The men fight until Alexei tries to open the door. Nikolai takes the drill from Gordon and wounds him, while Gordon pulls out Nikolai's screwdriver and in turn strikes his opponent in the neck. The astronauts who open the compartment find only 2 dead bodies, floating in zero gravity, embraced. The survivors arrange the bodies according to protocol and retreat to their sections, trying to make sense of what happened while the station orbits over the burning Earth. Later, Kira goes to the laboratory, examines the room, and finally finds the Zero module. This means Nika did not lie. She rushes to Christian and in his sleep capsule finds the Soyuz spacesuit and Russian research. It seems Christian was preparing to return to Earth alone. Meanwhile, Christian sabotages the station's life support system and tries to frame Kira, telling Alexei about Nika's plan to make the American woman take his research and escape. He accuses Kira of selfish motives when Alexei notices malfunctions. He observes a strange tension between Kira and Christian because of a knife the astronaut is using to make a sandwich. But Christian suddenly smiles and asks the Russian cosmonaut to leave them alone for a while. Alexei floats to the door, but Kira suddenly speaks a phrase about mutual support that Nika taught her. Alexei turns around. Then Christian confesses he disabled the life support system, grabs a knife, and attacks Kira and Alexei. A fight ensues. While Alexei blocks the knife with his hand, Kira strangles their colleague. Nevertheless, Alexei receives a knife wound to the hand. Kira provides him with first aid, and later they together restore the life support system. In the laboratory, Kira notices a net installed in the mouse cage, which kept the animals alive, realizing Alexei did this. Suddenly, the communication system turns on, normalizing the station's orbit, and the threat of falling is averted. Messages from their leadership arrive on the astronauts' computers, asking them to confirm that they have completed their missions to take control of the station. However, instead of responding or following government orders, Alexei and Kira take the research results, board the Soyuz, and fall to Earth in an uncontrolled freefall. Lastly, Alexei asks where they will fly to which Kira finds no answer. This is where the movie ends. In the future, an unknown organization locks millions of people in bunkers where they are forced to become bloggers and conduct endless streams to get everything they need to survive. Why us? Who were we before all this? A young man wakes up in the middle of a gloomy room, not understanding where he is and how he got there. At first, he examines the walls, hoping to find a way out, but there is none. Then the guy notices a turned-on monitor on which one word is written: share. He tries to enter different concepts related to the word exit, but the computer deems them incorrect and again offers to share. The guy confirms this command and the broadcast immediately turns on. The guy tries to ask questions as he can't stay here long. He has a dog at home that needs to be fed and walked, and besides, he wants to drink, but there's no water. He tries to ask this question to the computer and then an option buy appears, but the prisoner has no money and doesn't understand how he can buy water. Soon the guy realizes that real people are watching his broadcasts, but so far he does not quite understand what he can show the viewers, so he starts to grimace but falls and groans in pain, asking for help. The number of views sharply increases and viewers start sending donations of unknown currency with which any purchase can be made, but so far he only has enough for a bowl of dog food which appears in an opening niche on the wall. He expresses his indignation and tries to return the bowl, but there is no such function. And then the guy starts eating, occasionally making dog barks. This brings a new wave of views and donations, and the guy allows himself to buy clothes. However, they turn out to be women's. At night, he cries in despair and misunderstanding of the situation, but pulling himself together, he starts a new broadcast, during which he dances, tumbles, and entertains the viewers in every way possible. Soon, he acquires a t-shirt and an inflatable mattress. After some time, he already has a full wardrobe and shaving tools. Days go by, and the man allows himself a good meal and even alcohol, after which he tries to smash the monitor, but all he achieves is that the broadcasts stop. The guy tries in every possible way to beg forgiveness from the computer, and not getting an answer, again demands to be released from there. And then he just cries, begging for one more chance, and when the degree of despair reaches its limit, the guy lies down on the floor to wait for the end. The monitor turns on. On the screen appears the same room in which a man is. He greets the guy and explains that there are glitches in the system, but in general, upon reaching a certain level, he gained access to the common network. And now he can communicate with others like him, bloggers. The man believes that they all work for the unknown kidnappers who locked them in the bunker. The man talks to the guy all evening about the structure of his new world. He is very verbose and often jumps to other topics, so the guy even gets tired of him. But one day he hears the man cough. He tries to contact him and dialing his channel number, he comes across a cook teaching the audience to cook. The guy starts dialing different numbers and it turns out that behind each number is someone's channel. The trapped people teach viewers how to feed cats, apply makeup, and take care of themselves. One of these girls, an athlete, captivates the guy's attention for a long time. Eventually, he connects with a man who is broadcasting about near-death experiences that day. Meanwhile, the young man continues his acrobatic etudes, for which he receives small donations. After one such unsuccessful somersault, he lies on his mattress, and the adult man asks him to buy food, as his time is worth money. After the young man fulfills his request, the man draws attention to their numbers. The young man is under number 14, while the man is 6395873. Does the young man really think he appeared here before him? Everyone in the network is trying to figure out who locked them up here. There are theories about aliens and space, and one boy convinced everyone that they are asleep and undergoing a test. But the man believes that bloggers have locked themselves in their own world. He himself was once married to a star who the young man also liked. They reminisce about her songs and sing them as a duet. At night, the young man again connects to the channel of the girl who does yoga, and after admiring her, sends her a donation. In the morning, the young man buys furniture for himself and again talks to the man who continues to enlighten him. You can't stay at one level here because then the viewers will stop loving you and won't pay. So, you need to grow and spread your content. The young man begins to try himself in new genres. He tests stand-up comedy, physical exercises, cooking, singing, and magic tricks. And all this brings a new audience and more donations. At night, he now does gymnastics with the girl he likes, and then he buys medicine for the man. But trying to make the purchase, he makes some mistake and ends up in the room of a woman who is showering at that moment. She is outraged by such a bold intrusion and considers him a kidnapper. The young man struggles to explain that he is also a prisoner. She suggests setting rules, and the man joins their conversation. The woman asks him about the time he has spent in the bunker and hopes that someone tried to escape. The young man remembers how he hit the monitor, and this clearly did not please their owners. The woman thinks that they need to analyze these cases and find a vulnerability in the system. The young man says something about escape and is immediately deducted donations, indicating the existence of security. The woman does not understand the purpose of what is happening. If they wanted to punish them, they would just lock them somewhere and leave them to die without food and water. But they are fed and even provided with comfort. Apparently, the key question is, why them? Who were they before all this? But the young man admits that he wasn't someone important, but here he got the opportunity to live much better. Soon he invents a small show with socks and entertains the viewers with mini performances, which pleases the man and increases donations. One day he gifts the woman a shower curtain, which angers her because she is used to being independent. In the following days, the young man begins to teach people to draw, but since he himself can't draw, the lessons are humorous, and he himself poses as a model. The viewers like this, and the young man buys furniture for his room with the donations. One day, the woman can't stand it anymore and suggests starting a revolution, calling for an uprising of everyone else. A scandal breaks out among the trio, as the man is convinced that it is here that they got the opportunity to live better than before. That night, the man becomes ill. His cough chokes him, and suddenly he has a seizure, as a result of which his face presses against the monitor because he cannot move. The young man appeals to all subscribers for help. Maybe someone knows what to do in such a case. At this time, the woman tries to find a menu in the computer, but she accidentally presses some button, and suddenly the man's room starts burning, and he burns in front of his friend's eyes, unable to help himself. This causes despair and tears, and for a while, the pair do not communicate. But one night, the young man contacts her, trying to convince her that she is not to blame for what happened. He performs a show for her. Suddenly, she confesses that she wants to get drunk. They order alcohol for themselves and remember the last moment of freedom. Neither of them remembers how they ended up in the bunker. Then people dance in their cells. Later, they remember the old man, and the young man says that he still hears his voice. Suddenly, he admits that she was right, and maybe there are others who can replicate her action. Find a function visible only to them. If they all act together, maybe they can break free. The young man goes live and tells the audience about what happened. He points out oddities in the system where unknown functions sometimes appear, and if they can use these functions to hack, maybe the bunker will open? Suddenly, the athlete joins the conversation, who likes her current state because she decides how to spend her day. And right now, she will take care of herself, so she says goodbye to her new friends. The young man and the woman start reviewing all the strange things that the surrounding bloggers send, and some warmly support the pair. Later, he contacts the athlete again, and she reveals his secret to success. He makes people smile, which is very valuable. Misfortune exists everywhere, but so does happiness, so it's a person's own choice. She encourages him to breathe with her when the woman joins in. She analyzed the unknown functions sent to her. Someone can control the ventilation, and someone can even move the walls. She thinks these are different rooms located at different distances. Therefore, a map of connections needs to be built to break them. Although some do not want to destroy this world, the young man asks not to rush things. Suddenly, the woman takes scissors and cuts her hair, explaining it as a distraction for the bunker creators. If they don't react to their dangerous conversation, then they can be distracted by some actions. Later, the young man starts dealing all the numbers in a row and finds a novice like he once was. And at night, he joins the athlete, who calls on everyone to be happy here and now, and not try to destroy reality. A dispute starts between the women, where the athlete accuses the woman of violence against others, and she expresses the thought that the athlete is their kidnapper. The young man fears that if nothing works out, he will be left without an audience, and what will he do then? But later, he still goes live, and asks to show how many people are with him now. The number of votes rises to several million, causing his delight. The athlete is outraged. The young man surpassed her in channel reputation and demands to stop all this. A real conflict starts between the women. The athlete demands that others stop influencing the system while the woman asks to increase their efforts. And suddenly, the woman's room ignites and a downpour falls on her rival's room. The young man watches as both of his friends perish and can do nothing. He cries when a door opens behind him to a bright sunny day. Not believing his eyes, he approaches the threshold, but then his monitor comes to life and the young man begins to doubt. He returns to the screen and shouts into it that they managed to do it. There is nothing that cannot be done together. But while he rejoices, the door closes. Thinking, he starts playing his role again, while the number of votes and donations on his monitor rapidly increases. Through the characters, one can observe the stages of a person's immersion in online existence when a gadget becomes a mediator between the personality and others. It can be said that this is a story of life, with many good intentions and talents, but trivially spent on the pursuit of likes. Krefeld, 1984. One night, a father awakens his 6-year-old son Mark because they need to flee their now dangerous home. While the man hurries the older son, Thomas, Mark sees a frog statuette that stood on the shelf come to life. The father and sons drive into the night. Suddenly, the boy's mother Petra appears, begging the father not to take the sons as no one is pursuing him. He drives around her and races to the cemetery. 10 years pass. Mark works at the Living Sound store he opened with his brother and attends school, where he has a bad reputation as his brother was once expelled for aggressive behavior. Besides the boys, a lame kid named Memo works in the store, whom Thomas values for his loyalty. On his younger brother's birthday, Thomas gives him the Chronicle, an ancient book passed down in their family from generation to generation, telling of a parallel world called the Black Tower, full of terrifying creatures serving the Griffin, who wants to subjugate the world of humans. Only the Zimmerman family men can stand against the Griffon and save everyone from his invasion. Mark begins reading, considering it all fantasy, but the descriptions are too realistic, and the map looks genuine. Disturbed by the bloodthirsty drawings, Mark suddenly finds himself in unknown terrain at the base of a huge tower, and immediately a terrible horned creature confronts him. Mark runs and falls into a pit, and as the monster swings an axe at him, the boy screams in fear and finds himself back in his bed. The next day, Mark meets a new student at school, Rebecca, who classmates immediately inform about Mark's family troubles. His brother Thomas was in an asylum for hitting a teacher, and Mark attends psychotherapy sessions, trying to forget the events of one terrible night. But the girl isn't scared off, happily accepting Mark's invitation to the rooftop of the store, which is set up as a picnic area. In the evening, Mark finds Thomas at home, which is rare. Everything goes well until Petra starts a conversation about the asylum she put him in. Then Thomas invites his brother to look at evidence and drives him to the cemetery. They climb to the attic of the church where their ancestors had equipped a shelter. Thomas shows the father's belongings, missing a plumb bob. Here, Mark cuts his finger. His blood hits an inconspicuous peg, and a secret compartment in the floor opens, where the brothers find the tool the Zimmermans can use to kill the Griffin. But the moment Mark takes it in his hands, stone statues at the cemetery come to life, one appearing on the roof, blocking the brothers' way down. Nonetheless, they descend, but a stone devil jumps right in front of their car. A stone angel intervenes to protect the boys, and while the two statues fight, the brothers hide in the church. Waiting out the battle, Mark falls asleep, and in the morning, doesn't find Thomas next to him, but the hood of his car is covered in stone debris. Mark thanks the angel for help and drives to look for his brother. Opening the Chronicle, he hears voices advising to look for Thomas in the Black Tower. Mark goes to Dr. Peters, and it turns out that Becky is the daughter of his psychotherapist. Mark drives to the store, but his brother isn't there either. The boy opens the Chronicles and finds information about a portal located in the church. But then he gets scared by an unknown insect and ends up in a dense forest. Meanwhile, Memo, seeing that the brothers aren't in the store, calls their mother Petra, who immediately rushes to the police and reports the children missing. Mark finds Thomas, who rejoices that his brother has finally seen the truth, but learning that he simply teleported here, he concludes that his brother is a wanderer between worlds. In the morning, Thomas wakes his brother because nearby appear slave hunters. The boys run, but Thomas is wounded and captured, while Mark teleports to the store, terrifying Becky and Memo. Friends ask him to tell them everything, and he finally agrees. Meanwhile, in the Black Tower, one of the horned creatures reports to the master that they caught the Wanderer's brother, and he concludes that it's time for the return. Friends predictably don't believe Mark, and he leads them to the church, but there's no attic above. Becky considers this a cruel joke, as it was dangerous for Memo with his leg to climb up there. Mark gets angry, and the girl, offended, leaves. In rage, Mark hits the stone base of the statue, and these blows resonate in the caves of the Black Tower. At night, Mark goes to Memo because he needs help searching for his brother, and although he considers the boy crazy, he goes with him to the portal in the church. The boys follow the instructions from the book and find a door with signs in the basement. Mark performs the necessary manipulations, and the door opens. Astonished, Memo goes there and immediately notices that his vision has become normal, and his leg no longer hurts. And while the boy rejoices, the passage closes. Memo asks to remember how Mark returned home last time, and he shows how he closed his eyes, thought, and disappears, leaving Memo alone in a strange world. Memo didn't appreciate such a joke. Opening his eyes, Mark is horrified and tries to return for Memo, but it doesn't work. Then Petra enters, sees the chronicles, locks her son in the room, and he falls into a rage, causing the walls of the Black Tower to crumble. Petra calls the doctor and he asks to release the son. Mark rushes to the church but only finds a note on a piece of wood that Memo is nearby. The boy returns to the store and, taking the necessary items, goes to Becky, where he tells her that Memo stayed in the Black Tower. He leaves her the chronicles and a note asking her to take the book to Petra if they don't return. He goes to the world of the Black Tower and tries to find a friend, while Becky reads the chronicles and ponders the boy's mental health. Mark emerges from the forest and, setting up a sound system on a cliff, plays Memo's favorite music. Meanwhile, the slave hunters capture a village where they seek a man with a loud voice. One of the boys, wishing to save his family, volunteers to become one, and they take him away, while a group of horned creatures goes to the strange sounds in the hills. At the same time, Becky shares Mark's secret with classmates and suggests conducting an experiment to animate a plant from the book. The volunteer is brought to the cave and seated in a stone chair. Now the griffin, wanting to speak, inserts its claw into the boy's back, and he voices its thoughts. While Mark is discovered by horned creatures, the boy runs from them when an unfamiliar man, completely wrapped in rags, covers the boy with smelly fish and hides him in a forest den. Meanwhile, Becky performs the ritual, dripping water on the flower, but young people vainly wait for some manifestations of magic. The flower remains dry. Becky suggests a last attempt at the portal, not noticing how a classmate puts the flower in a glass of water. At the same time, the horned creatures leave, and the stranger helping Mark removes the rag from his face, revealing himself to be Memo. But he's been in this world for 2 weeks, not 2 days. Then the boys see a caravan of slaves, and in one of them, they recognize Thomas. But while they can't help him, they themselves are noticed. The boys run from the pursuers and end up on a high cliff with no way out. On Earth, Mark's classmates come to the church and perform everything prescribed, but the door doesn't open. Then Mark grabs Memo, jumps off the cliff, and teleports to his room. Petra hears a noise in her son's room, runs there, and sees Mark and Memo, who now needs glasses again. Mark calls Becky and asks her to bring the chronicles, while a flower blooms on her desk, from which something terrible emerges. The next day, the boys begin developing a plan to save Thomas, especially since Memo now knows a lot about the world of the Black Tower. He built a hut on the shore of a lake where the caravans of slaves stop, following which one can find the place of the boys' confinement. Meanwhile, the griffin is reported that the wanderer between worlds has escaped, and it destroys its close. And Becky, waking up, finds a blooming flower, miraculously avoiding contact with the creature, and gives the chronicles to her father because she now considers Mark sick. In school, she tells the boy about this, and he experiences another fit of rage. Becky's father, having read the chronicles, goes to Petra and admits that he underestimated her son's illness. The woman decides to hospitalize Mark despite the doctor's protests. Later, the woman detains her son near the house when an ambulance arrives, and paramedics grab the boy, but he resists and runs across the roof to the church, where Memo has long been waiting. But the paramedics come there too. The boys fend them off when suddenly a hooded man comes and scatters the medics, beating one to death. The boys run to the door, while Petra waiting outside sees a bloodied Mark coming out of the church. At that time, Memo leads his friend to his hut by the lake. Meanwhile, the father informs Becky about Mark's deed and forbids her from leaving the house. He himself goes to the crime scene and confirms Mark's capacity for crime. Becky enters her room, turns on music and lies down on the floor. At the same time, a downpour suddenly starts in the Black Tower, and the alarmed Memo shows the scorpions hatching from the flowers upon contact with water. The boys run away. On Earth, Becky is attacked by a similar scorpion that enters her mouth. She manages to pull it out with tongs and destroy it by sprinkling salt. The boys also manage to escape by climbing onto a rock. Morning comes, the scorpions dry out right before their eyes, and Becky rushes to look for the chronicles because she now believes the boy. She takes the book and hurries to Petra. At the same time, the boys reach a lake in the mountains. On Earth, Becky's father comes home, takes off his bloodied clothes and burns them in the yard because it was he who was in Mark's guise in the church and killed the medic. Meanwhile, a faceless wizard arrives at the Griffin, reporting that he did everything to prevent the boy from returning to the human world. And Mark, at this time, admires Memo's cabin and is surprised by the changes in his friend. From the cabin, one can monitor the paths, and the caravan will not pass by unnoticed. But just in case, the boys set up signal cans. Becky comes to Petra, where a detective arrives, who also notes the oddity of what is happening. The girl tells everything she managed to find out about the Zimmerman family, and only then notices that she forgot her backpack with the chronicle in the classmate's car. Mark and Memo spend the evening by the fire, developing a plan. Mark can go to the mines, find Thomas, and teleport home with him. Memo is ready to walk to the portal that Mark will open, but the boy needs to train in teleportation. At this time, the wizard reports the plans of the boys who stopped at the lake. The Griffin orders their capture and reminds that he does not need complications in the human world yet. In the morning, Mark wakes up feeling someone's presence, and going to the shore, hears the screams of a fish, which Memo catches, and guts. Mark remembers how and where he teleported, and begins training. At the same time, a messenger from the Black Tower comes to Dr. Peters's house, telling about Mark's appearance. The doctor is proud of himself because it was he who prepared the boy, invoking the necessary rage in him and cutting off his way to the world of people. After seeing off the guest, the doctor goes to Becky's room and discovers that she has disappeared. He gathers dust in her room and, tasting it, learns about everything she did during the day. Then he goes to a youth party where the girl went to get her backpack back. Meanwhile, Memo expresses the thought that fear is not necessary for teleportation, and Mark remembers the kiss with Becky and teleports to the town. He immediately returns, but it turns out that he was gone for 2 days. The boy finds out that strong emotion and a vision of the place to which one must move are needed for teleportation. At this time, Becky finds her water-soaked backpack in the kitchen, and opening the book, sees a bloomed flower. The girl realizes the threat looming over those present, takes a pack of salt, and goes to track down the monster. In the other world, Mark again hears someone's footsteps and sees his father, who accuses him of his own death. Memo brings him to his senses, but Mark is sure that someone is getting into his head. Meanwhile, Dr. Peters comes to the party when one of the girls is attacked by the monster. Becky rushes for help when her father stops her and, using hypnosis, orders her to leave. Petra and the detective sitting in the hall suddenly see young people flying out of the crowd, then screams are heard, and everyone runs away. And in the middle of the hall remains an incomprehensible creature, resembling a many-legged scorpion. The detective pulls out a gun, but the monster attacks him, knocking the weapon out. And then Petra picks up the pistol and saves the detective. Then the doctor enters the hall and the killed millipede turns into a bear. In the morning, Mark wakes up again from the scream of the fish and, in irritation, argues with Memo. But his box of nails, which he uses to remove anger, turns out to be empty. He runs out to the shore, where Memo teases him and throws the nails into the lake. Then he reminds him of his father, saying that he is to blame for his death. In a rage, Mark hits Memo, thereby collapsing the walls of the Black Tower. The Griffin sends hunters after him. Meanwhile, Memo collects firewood and, returning to the lake, sees Mark hitting another Memo. He touches the body and it suddenly scatters. but the traces in the sand betray the direction of his run. Memo throws a stick and stuns the faceless wizard who disguised himself as Memo. The boys tie him to a cot, and he tries to deceive the guys, alternately taking the forms of their fathers. Only under the threat of fire does the wizard admit that he is Mamit, a creature capable of recreating thought and showing what people want to see. He did everything at the behest of the griffin because he feeds on Mark's hatred. At that moment, the signal of the caravan's arrival sounds, and in the town they investigate an accident, although no one can understand how the circus bear got out of the cage. The detective asks Petra for a conversation and tells her that after her husband's self-immolation, they did not find a trace of his body. He was taking antidepressants, thanks to which he was able to see the true face of the prosecutor. And it was not human. The case was slowed down, and today they both saw a monster, not a bear. So, they need to look for the chronicles. At the same time, the doctor brings Becky to her senses and she remembers the story about the Mammoths who served the griffin, to which her father reacts very aggressively, which makes the girl suspicious. The doctor locks her up. Mark and Memo follow the trail of the Horned squad to the mine, where people work. The commander of the Horned reports to the mine overseer about the failure of their mission and receives an order to process the tunnels with tar mud. Mark, to find Thomas, turns on the music system. The brother raises his hand, but the Horned ones immediately take him into the mine. Mark suggests waiting for darkness. At night the boys say goodbye, and Mark teleports while Memo distracts the guard. The boy finds his brother, but it turns out that the tar prevents teleportation. Thomas admits that he was used as bait. They even left him a plumb line. This means that the griffin is ready to attack the human world, using Mark's power. At the same time, Memo runs to the portal, leading away the Horned squad, while the brothers argue about who will fight the griffin. Mark shows his superiority by breaking through the cave wall with a plumb line. The brothers run away, and Memo falls into an ambush and loses fingers on his hand. Mark and Thomas catch up with the squad, and, having killed one of the Horned ones, find the injured Memo. Learning about the escape of the Wanderer, the griffin emerges from his hiding place and flies in the footsteps of the people who at that time are driving to the portal in a captured cart. But at the very door, Thomas suddenly demands that Mark give him the plumb line. He refuses, and Thomas forcibly takes it, and then the griffin appears above them. At this time, the detective and Petra take Becky out of the house, ignoring her father's protests. Mark comes to his senses and hears Thomas's voice from the mist, picks up the plumb line he threw, and realizes that his brother was captured by the griffin. At that time, Petra, the detective, and Becky are trying to open the portal. And the griffin calls Mark to battle, fueling his hatred. But the boy suddenly remembers his father's advice, calms down, and refuses to fight while Petra opens the portal. Becky manages to pick up Memo when Mark sees the enraged griffin and wounds him with a plumb line, forcing him to drop Thomas. The boys drag him into the passage and close the door in the monster's face. Meanwhile, a Mamit in the guise of Dr. Peters kills another Mamit who will now work on Earth instead of him. It turns out that Dr. Peters is a Mamit in human form, and in the church, he killed the medic while in the guise of Mark, so that the police would look for the boy and he could not return to the world of people. Sometime later, Petra comes to her sons in the hospital and asks for forgiveness for mistrust, but now she has seen everything herself, and together with the detective, is ready to support them. Mark thanks Memo for everything, goes to Becky, and, having kissed her, teleports her to the lakeshore, while new Horned ones are born from stones in the cave. An entertaining adventure series, quite decently filmed by German cinematographers. And judging by the finale, there will be a second season too. 1,000 years ago, the first settlers left Earth and formed the League of Free Worlds. Some got warm, sun-drenched planets, while others were fated to be born on a planet covered with impenetrable swamps. People built a model city there where order, prosperity, and total control reigned. Christie was among those who couldn't reconcile with such an existence, which landed her in prison. But since there is no death penalty on planet XT-59, a group of 10 prisoners is sentenced to lifelong exile in the swamps. If lucky, they might reach the Paradise Islands, but no one recalls such instances since the swamps are teeming with dangerous creatures. This time, as the prisoners were prepared for their last journey, the captain incapacitates one of the prisoners, his head shrouded in a sack, and orders him to move forward. The prisoner inquires about the security barrier and begins to move very cautiously. He miraculously avoids the hit from the security's invisible barrier, and the captain orders to deactivate the protection. Then, the captain reads the sentence and removes the sack from the prisoner's head, followed by an order to give the prisoners a metal box with supplies. They have an hour to set off, or the guards will kill them on the spot. One of the women goes into hysteria, claiming she's a tourist and innocent. She tries to run, but Christie catches and calms the unfortunate woman. The prisoner, freed from the sack, suggests that people introduce themselves. He is Irwin, but the initiative is intercepted by the formidable-looking Yost, nicknamed the Polar Wolf, who knows these swamps well as it's not his first exile. The wolf wants to know everything about each member of the team, but their acquaintance is interrupted by the appearance of a dangerous local creature living underground, called the Pagan. The creature senses vibration and moves towards it, dragging its prey underground. Christie declares that she intends to only listen to Irwin. Yost reminds her of his superiority, to which Irwin proposes to divide the supplies and opens the box. He manages to grab only a knife when the others pounce on the box with supplies. The wolf again reminds everyone that he's the boss, but Irwin refuses to listen to a prisoner and announces his departure to the Paradise Islands. Christie joins him, but first, they want their share of the supplies. The wolf's henchman tries to claim rights over Christie. Then Irwin puts a knife to his throat, reminding that any attempt of the prisoners to destroy each other will result in them being immediately shot on the spot. So, the wolf has no choice but to give the pair their share of supplies. Additionally, Irwin requests the metal box itself in exchange for a portion of food, and the wolf agrees to give it away. The wolf orders his group to prepare for the journey when Christie asks Irwin to help the helpless tourist. But he refuses. That woman is already dead, even though she doesn't know it. Irwin explains to Christie that she should go first because she is lighter than him, and he will be able to pull her out if she falls into the swamp. At that time, a voice from the fortress commands the prisoners to lave the shore. The wolf leads his team forward. Irwin and Christie tie a heavy box with ropes and also set off. Suddenly, a shot is fired from the fortress. People hide behind the rocks, and Irwin realizes that he was the intended target. He forces Christie to crawl out of the dangerous square. Along the way, the girl notices small, crawling creatures, but Irwin assures her of their harmlessness, suggesting they could be their food, which disgusts Christie. Soon, the pair reach a relatively safe place and confirm that Wolf's team is following their trail. Watching how Irwin calculates everything in advance and can find a solution to any problem, Christie worries, trying to understand who the man was before his exile. The girl doubts the existence of Paradise Islands, to which Irwin rightly remarks that then they wouldn't have tried to kill him. After all, the guards would have been sure that he would definitely die. And although it's his first time in the swamp, he is confident that he can find the right way. Meanwhile, the captain is reprimanded by the president for the advisor still being alive. Sergeant Matthias, who was the disguised prisoner, failed to eliminate the advisor. The captain reassures the president, stating the swamps are impassable. Meanwhile, Christie and Irwin find a small stream of clean water, and the girl washes her face, pondering her misfortune. Suddenly, Irwin asks Christie to freeze, but she thinks he's decided to take advantage of her. However, it turns out Irwin spotted the Pagan, which suddenly emerged from under the ground. Christie grabs a knife and cuts off part of the creature. After that, Christie treats Irwin's wound while sharing that she ended up in prison for standing up to an inspector who tried to force her into intimacy. At that moment, the wolf's group appears from behind the rocks. The man intends to take back the metal box, but Irwin takes the part of the creature cut off by Christie and uses it as an electric whip. The wolf realizes the situation is bad and decides to let them go. The pair leaves, but the wolf stubbornly follows their tracks. Irwin heard that on the rotten shore there's a place where former prisoners live, and the wolf is their leader. He follows them, hoping that the pair will first fall into a swamp trap. Irwin notices the tips of the Pagan sticking out of the ground and orders Christie to lie down, be silent, and not move. They do so, watching as a gigantic root of the Pagan appears over the wolf's group, dragging several people underground. Meanwhile, the president again contacts the captain, who assures that he has taken the necessary measures and his man is on the trail. In the swamps, Irwin and Christie stop for the night. The man is ready to talk about himself if the girl solves his riddle about the cost of a chocolate bar. But while he states the conditions of the riddle, Christie falls asleep. The girl wakes up to a strange sound and sees a wave of creatures approaching them. She tries to run, but Erwin throws her into the box, climbs in himself, and closes the lid. The pair waits out the invasion, and although the box's lid is eventually breached, the people remain unharmed. Finally, silence falls, and they emerge outside. Christie's first question is about the answer to the riddle, and knowing it, she calms down. Now the box is no longer needed, and the pair throws it away. Soon they reach the liquid part of the swamp. Meanwhile, the remaining part of the wolf's group follows their trail, but Layla, realizing they might lose the couple, runs after Erwin and Christie. The wolf rushes after her and falls into a swamp pit. Here Layla slips up, saying that Erwin is a former presidential advisor and knows best how to act. Nevertheless, one of the prisoners, Jan, helps the wolf out. In the evening, Erwin sets up camp, forces Christie to eat raw tadpoles, and confesses that he was the president's advisor, but his conscience tormented him. He collected a lot of different information and wanted to tell the public about it. The authorities realized they couldn't get rid of him quietly and sent him to the swamps. But he managed to launch a virus into the control system, which can only be turned off knowing the code. And only he has the code. So, after the system's collapse, free people will be able to build their new free city management system. Christie reminds him that then they will definitely be looking for him, but the man is confident that by that time, they will already be on the islands. Meanwhile, in the city, the system begins to collapse. The communications satellites fail first. In the morning, Layla and those who left the wolf encounter wild people on their way. Hearing their screams, Christie curses whoever invented this method of punishment. Erwin admits that he did it because he thought it was humane. Christie breaks down and berates Erwin, urging him to burn himself so no one can learn his code. He starts screaming, calling the savages to fight to die, but no one comes out. Then Christie confesses that she was offered freedom for his death. Meanwhile, the wolf finds those hiding among the rocks of his group. To save herself, Layla tells about the offer she received to kill the advisor, after which a ship will fly for her. The wolf orders to find the sensor on her body. The girl runs away and dies in the web of a dangerous swamp fungus. Seeing that their spy is dead, the captain arms Sergeant Matthias and sends him on the advisor's trail. Meanwhile, another man from the wolf's group dies, and then Jan catches up with the couple, and distracted by him, Erwin falls into a trap to the wolf, who intends to exchange the advisor for freedom. Erwin, tied up, tries to persuade Christie to run, but she suddenly kisses him. The wolf forces Erwin to stand, but he mocks the prisoner, and the wolf has to carry Erwin on his back. Meanwhile, Sergeant Matthias's group lands in the ruins of the old prison where wild criminals live. Soon the wolf's group also gets there. Leaving the tied advisor and Christie aside, the wolf goes to negotiate with the sergeant. But while they are agreeing, Erwin frees himself and escapes. The wolf promises to find him but gets shot by the sergeant, after which Matthias finds Christie and Jan, and killing the latter leads the girl forward. Erwin confronts Matthias and demands to release Christie in exchange for himself. The military agrees but shoots a tranquilizer, hitting Christie, and himself receives a knife in the back from the fatally wounded wolf. Erwin thanks the dying man, who advises not to go to the Paradise Islands because they don't exist. Then he drinks poison to avoid suffering. Later, Erwin, carrying Christie in his arms, reaches the sea, and the advisor realizes that the Paradise Islands are rafts made of plants, and they can cross the strait on them. Meanwhile, the captain loses contact with Matthias and realizes that further search for the advisor is useless, but he sends the last combat drone after him. At this time, Christie comes to her senses and realizes that their island is gradually sinking. The prisoner with them, Job, hears this and goes into the water to save the couple. Soon they hear the sound of an approaching drone, but the drone fails to reach them and falls into the water, thereby proving that Erwin's virus worked and the city's control system is destroyed. Their joy is overshadowed by a cliff appearing ahead. The couple wraps themselves in their plant-made island and miraculously survives a gigantic waterfall. Soon, they reach the shore, where a secret bunker is set up in case of the president's escape, designed and built by Erwin. But he doesn't know the entire code. The last figure was entered by the president. There are only 2 attempts, so guessing it is impossible. Then Christie remembers the riddle about the chocolate bar and, knowing the president's answer to it, which Erwin also posed to him, suggests entering the number he named. And the bunker opens, but then it turns out that the hidden spaceship there is single-seated. Erwin insists that Christy should fly alone, but she refuses because she loves him. In the last scenes of the movie, the voices of Christy and Erwin are heard, making it clear that they somehow managed to squeeze into the spaceship together. Thanks to their rescue, the League of Free Worlds learned the truth about the planet and destroyed the remnants of the Total Control System. But 10 years later, a new system was established on planet XT-59, much more cruel than the previous one. The movie is simple and at times imperfect, but it's truthful and unexpectedly relevant because no one can bring freedom to the people from the outside. Everything is achieved only through one's own efforts and by taking responsibility for oneself and no one else. The 1950s. Alice and Jack live in a typical American town. They hang out with friends, have fun, drive around, and love each other. One day, while Alice is getting ready for a party with friends, Jack goes to work with a crowd of other white collars. A female voice narrates that today is the 997th day. All employees are on their way to headquarters. All residents are safe and accounted for. Ladies are wished a good day, and Alice starts her household chores. Then she goes to her dance classes, like all the exemplary wives in town. The instructor, Shelley, reminds them, beauty is in control and grace is in symmetry. After the class, Alice returns home, chats with her neighbor Bonnie, who constantly scolds her children, and goes to take down the dried laundry. A catchy tune constantly plays in Alice's head, and she hums it. Suddenly, she notices another neighbor, Margaret, standing in front of her house, oblivious to her surroundings. Alice starts cooking, but one egg arouses her suspicion. She squeezes it in her hand and the egg turns out to be empty. She crushes the rest, they're all hollow. This activity is interrupted by burnt meat. In the evening, she greets her husband, beautifully dressed, with her hair done, and at a set table. However, her husband decides to start with another, more pleasant activity. The next day, the women relax by the pool. Alice is distracted, the song in her head again causing her concern. Then a visual sequence appears, a circle of women in wigs. Later, Alice approaches a model of the town and mindlessly traces her finger along the streets. And when she leaves the town limits, Bonnie picks her up. It's time for cocktails served by her children. During this time, the men discuss distracting topics. Everything is decent, sunny, and calm. A signal sounds, and Shelley welcomes the new residents. She is happy that the couple can learn from her husband, Frank, who has created something extraordinary, a new world. Margaret interrupts Shelley's speech, saying she and her husband shouldn't be here. Alice's husband hastily leads her away, and the newly appeared Frank apologizes to the guests. The couple is going through a tough time. They're tasked to chase dreams and confront chaos, the main enemy of progress. And they all change the world. The guests echo Frank's words. Everyone here is happy, they are all one family. The man thanks the women for supporting their husbands, they are their support. The fun continues. Alice goes to find Jack, but finds Margaret, who says she has nightmares she can't be here, but Alice's husband quickly pulls the curtain in front of Alice. Alice finds her husband in the house. Jack kisses her, and the couple gets some alone time. But at the brightest moment, Alice sees Frank, who smiling, watches their lovemaking. Later, the women gather in a shopping center and discuss their perfect lives, and poor Margaret. Alice feels sorry for her neighbor, though Bonnie thinks she brought the trouble on herself. After all, she took her son into the desert by herself. They found her, but without the child. The conversation turns to what the men are doing. No one knows for sure, but it's said that they are making weapons. Bonnie cuts in. That's not their business. Women also do work. They create comfort. At night, Alice has a nightmare, but in the morning, as usual, she sees her husband off to work and starts her household chores. Then she goes on a trip. She is the only one left on the trolley bus and says she just wants to ride. Suddenly, she sees a plane flying towards the mountains, and then it crashes. Alice yells to the driver, but he doesn't understand what she wants. She urges him to help the victims, but he is on his route and cannot deviate. Alice jumps out of the trolley bus and runs towards the mountains. She walks a long way through the desert, then reaches a road and climbs a high mountain, topped by a strange dome. She approaches closer and stops at a mirrored glass. Around her, no one, only her reflection. Alice raises her hands to the glass and loses consciousness. In front of her in the darkness, a circle of dancing women and a male voice calls for order. People must allow themselves to discover what life should be like. The next moment, Alice finds herself on her bed. Coming to the kitchen, she sees Jack preparing dinner. The dishes are in disarray, many groceries spoiled. Alice doesn't understand what's happening, and her husband explains that when he came from work, she was already asleep, and she returned home on the trolley bus. Alice doesn't understand. Did the driver come back for her? But now Jack looks at his wife uncomprehendingly. Alice decides she saw everything in a dream. The next morning, everything goes as usual. Alice sends her husband off and starts cleaning the window glass, but suddenly it seems to move. It presses her against the wall, and the woman is gasping for air. The next moment, the phone rings and Alice is completely free. Margaret's voice on the phone urges her to get out of there. After all, she was there and saw it all herself. Alice again sees dancing women, but now it is herself and her friends. And suddenly, instead of her own reflection, Margaret appears, approaching the mirror from the other side and starts banging her head against the surface. Alice screams and comes to. She runs home and sees Margaret on the roof of her house. Turning to Alice, the woman cuts her own throat and falls down. Alice screams in horror, and the arriving employees pick her up and carry away the neighbor's body. In the evening, she tries to explain to Jack, but he doesn't believe his wife. Margaret is in the hospital. She accidentally cut herself while washing windows. Alice feels guilty because her neighbor asked for help. What is happening around them? She asks him to tell her what he is doing on the project, but he cannot talk about it. He asks her to stop the hysterics, which could ruin everything. At night, Alice watches an advertisement for their town and catches herself thinking that it feels like she is floundering in a pool from which it is impossible to swim out. In the morning, she is cooking and suddenly starts wrapping her head with cling film. Alice seems to want to bring herself to her senses, but even the suffocation doesn't help, and she tears off the film. The arriving doctor assures the woman that it's just nervous strain, as Alice witnessed Margaret falling. The woman again insists that her neighbor slit her own throat. The doctor suggests prescribing her pills, but Jack refuses. They will cope. The doctor assures Margaret will soon recover and return home. He leaves, forgetting his briefcase, from which Alice manages to pull out a folder with Margaret's personal file. But all the text is smeared, unreadable. Alice burns the folder. She drinks alcohol and again sees dancing women. Then she finds herself in the bathroom. Jack is unhappy. They will be late, and he brings her a dress. Then he asks Alice to think about having a child, and tonight they have a wonderful evening ahead. The couple arrives at a restaurant where all the town's residents have already gathered. A performance by a glamorous blonde is demonstrated to the audience, and Alice again sees the circle of women and Margaret killing herself. Alice feels ill, but those around her do not notice. Frank gives a speech and invites Jack on stage. He is ready to congratulate the man as he is now entering the senior expert council. He presents Jack with a token of loyalty, a ring. The audience applauds, and Jack performs a dance of gratitude. Alice, unable to watch this, runs to the bathroom. She has a vision of another Jack who has lost his job. A perplexed Bonnie finds her. Alice tries to explain something, but her friend interrupts her. Was Alice at the headquarters? Has she gone mad? She's acting like a spoiled child. Her job is to support her husband, yet she is ruining his career. And now she is behaving like Margaret. Returning to the hall, Alice watches Jack's triumph and restrains herself. In the morning, Jack reminds her that they will have guests in the evening. She needs to express gratitude to Frank. Alice greets the guests with a smile on her face. Everything, as always, is perfect. Her husband meets Frank, while Alice finishes the appetizers. The man enters the kitchen and suddenly starts talking to the hostess. He regrets that Bonnie didn't believe her, but she didn't believe Margaret either. He has been waiting a long time for someone to challenge him. The guests sit down at the table. Alice demonstratively takes the host's seat. Jack, complying, sits next to her. The conversation about nothing begins. Suddenly Alice asks why all the women in the town are from one, at most two states, and they all vacation in the same places. Jack tries to steer the conversation away, but Alice continues. They all met their husbands on a train, under similar circumstances. All their stories are the same because they are told what to remember, but sometimes they suddenly remember the forbidden. Frank is doing something with all of them. The man, smirking, reminds her of her nervous breakdown. Why isn't she getting treated? And why was she at the headquarters? Jack is horrified. She was at the headquarters? Frank continues. She broke the rules. It's the result of psychosis, but she revealed herself to him in his bedroom. Alice is stunned by such a dreadful lie, but Jack believes Frank unconditionally. The woman tries to appeal to the guests' common sense. Where do these products come from? And what's in them? But then Shelley stands up. She will no longer allow her husband to be insulted. The guests leave. Frank is disappointed. He expected something more interesting from her. Jack, having seen everyone out, returns to the house. Alice tries to convey to him that he is the most precious person to her. And she asks to leave here, anywhere, just together. And Jack agrees. They leave the house and get into the car. And then the husband apologizes to his wife, but in the next moment, employees pull her out of the car and carry her into the darkness. Alice finds herself on an operating table. Visions with her husband pass by. A doctor in a mask leans over her, in which she recognizes herself. In the next moment, Dr. Alice finishes the operation and goes home, where her unemployed husband meets her. He hasn't prepared dinner because he didn't know what she would want. There's also no hot water. Alice is very tired. She has been standing at the operating table for 30 hours, so she denies her husband intimacy. He sits at the monitor and listens to the advertisement for a new simulation. And again, a sunny morning in Paradise Town. Alice returns to her surroundings. An enthusiastic Bonnie meets her and shares the latest news. Alice hugs her children and does not notice her friend's worried look. Her husband goes to work. Alice does household chores, dances, and swims. And she meets her husband. She takes the roast out of the oven while Jack picks a record, humming a song that seems to wake Alice up. Jack walks through the dark city, entering his apartment. Meanwhile, his physical characteristics are narrated. He is absolutely fit to participate in the Victory Project with his friend Alice, and he takes on the responsibility of maintaining his wife's body's vital functions. Alice sees herself in bed, restrained and entangled with wires. Jack cares for her body because he is obliged to exit the simulation each day and work to afford it. The man lies down next to her and hums the song that Alice is hearing now. She realizes he has deprived her of real life, but the man did this to save her from constant work. Frank created this world so they could live as they wanted. He works like a damned soul for this, but she is happy. But what about the others? So they really are hostages. Jack hugs her, but Alice hits him on the head. The next moment, Bonnie finds her. Jack is dead, and she immediately reports it to Frank. Bonnie confesses that she knows everything about the simulation. She chose this life herself because here she can be with her children, who are alive. But other women know nothing. Alice must run, or they will kill her. The woman steps out into the yard, goes to Jack's car, and drives into the desert. Employees chase after her. Cars catch up with her, but Alice, making a maneuver, causes a collision in which a doctor dies. Her pursuers continue the chase. Frank is informed of the incident. He orders the woman to be captured at all costs. In the next moment, Shelley stabs him with a knife. He is a fool and has botched everything. Alice races towards the mountain, but near the summit, her car stalls. She continues on foot. Employees pursue her, and there ahead, the dome. The woman approaches it, her pursuers just steps behind her, and suddenly feels her husband's hands on her shoulders, asking her not to leave him. Shelley reaches out. A strike. Darkness. Visions of the perfect life in victory. And a sigh from a woman waking up in reality. That case when it's hard to take someone's side. The husband deprived his wife of reality with good intentions to make her happy, and probably many would want to escape into the simulation from everyday problems. But can you make someone happy against their will?